This is the TKW Toolkit Workbench Screencast Part 3. In Part 2 I discussed the three modes of operation of TKW: transmission, simulation and validation. In Part 3 I'll be discussing batch processing and the use of context paths. The contents of the test run folder within the additional tools in the contrib directory allows users to perform batch processes on multiple messages, allowing transmission and validation of multiple messages and maintenance of the folders. These batch files are applicable for both client and host systems. Here we have an instance of TKW, and if we look in the contrib directory under additional tools, we find the test run folder containing the batch files. If we copy this and place it within the configuration we're using, we can then find the appropriate messages and we'll copy some of those. And place them within the test run directory under test files. The batch files are numerically ordered. We can see the first one, clearfolders.bat. This clears the runtime folders ready for a test run. As we can see from previous runs, we already have things within these directories. They're now cleared. Depending on the system under test, you will need to use either the simulator or the transmitter. Number 2, simulator starts the simulator using the config specific properties file. It's sat waiting. Number 3 transmits the test files. It transmits the contents of test files folder file by file using the config specific properties file one by one. And here each of the test messages are being transmitted. Number 4, validate all results. Validates the sent and received files, creating reports in the config validator reports folder here. If we have a look in the results directory, we see we have a test files HTTP 200 report. This shows that each of the messages has been transmitted and has received an HTTP 200 response. If we now have a look at the validator reports, we can see that 14 files have been validated with no check issues. There are 2 further batch files which can be useful in the course of testing. Transmit only. This transmits single files from the transmitter source subfolder of the config. And validate only. This validates any files in the messages for validation subfolder of the config. I think this shows that the batch files can be used to transmit multiple messages and validate the results very quickly. Context paths. A request sent to the test bench is distinguished by its action and the context path of the URL to which it's sent. The context path is a part of the URL that comes after the hostname and optional port. Here's an example URL which has in blue the host and in green the context path. If we have a look at the HTTP header that would result from a message sent there, we'd see post with the context path, HTTP 1.1, and below that host with the host name. For messages being transmitted to TKW from a system under test, where TKW is working in simulator mode, there are three context paths which are already declared in the internal TKW properties, which are an unpopulated one, which is used by the simulator's HTTP handler for bad URI responses. There's a sync SOAP, this uses a synchronous handler class, and the async SOAP, which uses the asynchronous handler class for its response. These predefined context paths can be overridden, and further combinations of context paths and handler can be declared in the TKW properties file. If we have a look at the TKW properties file, toward the bottom we can see down here that the name list property lists the context that the test bench simulator will support. For each entry in that list we have two properties defined. So for example, if we have a look at the pipe and hat sync SOAP, we can see that we have a class property. It's the name of the Java class that will handle the requests on that context path. And we have the path, which is the actual context path for that name. This means that any messaging sent to a context path of pipe and hat sync here will use this request handler within TKW. For messages being transmitted by TKW to a system under test, where TKW is working in transmitter mode, we have these properties. URLs can be declared for the send, the reply to, and the fault to, including IP, port, and context path. With this properties file, if we were wanting to use TKW to send messages to the pipe and hat sync that I demonstrated earlier, we'd use this context path. On a general note about TKW negative testing, the simulator is currently designed to work with positive test cases and not full ITK fault behaviour. This is a future enhancement.